basically, I mean, I'll just introduce Gabor. Gabor will tell you something more about the project, and then later we'll be basically talking about each other individually about our research so far, or some aspects of our research during the past 2.5 years, or something like this, basically. So I'll just briefly introduce the first speaker, our principal investigator, Gabor Egri, historian holding a PhD from ELTE, Budapest, senior researcher fellow and director general of the Institute of Political History, Budapest. His research focuses on nationalism, everyday ethnicity, and politics of identity in modern Eastern European history. He was a visiting fellow in a bunch of institutes and universities, among whom Stanford University and NIOS in Regensburg. His latest book, and I'll just read the translation in English, which is definitely more easier for me, Ethnicity, Identity, Politics, Hungarian Minorities Between Nationalism and Regionalism in Romania and Czechoslovakia, 1918-1944. He also authored articles published in East Central Europe, Hungarian Historical Review, Historie otázky, Problémy, Slavic Review, and so on. He is, as actually Vieran already told you, our principal investigator in the ERC Consolidator project Nepotrans, so negotiating post-imperial transitions. This is the shorter, basically, the shorter form of the title. And I mean, Gabor will tell you now something more about the project. So Gabor, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Vieran. And thank you for the possibility to tell something about the project. Although I really want to restrain myself, it's not the most important thing to dwell long on what the project in general is. It's much more fascinating to listen to the presentations of individual research that had been conducted throughout the last 2.5 years. Nevertheless, I will really very briefly go over the basics of the project, the most important ideas, and also just to illustrate somehow something that is, I think, one of the most fascinating things in terms of methodology and also to a certain extent theory. Tell something about my most recent research on economic transition, or the transition of business elites at the wake of the post-Habsburg, at the wake of the First World War in the post-Habsburg space. So I prepared something that is supposed to be a presentation, and I'm also supposed to have some experience with sharing these presentations. So let's hope I will not bust everything. Okay, so let me know if you see the slides. Thanks. And let's hope that I can switch to the next one. So, nevertheless, so this is a project about analyzing transitions and society in transition from the Habsburg Empire to the successor states, on the basis of the idea of looking at the Habsburg, at Austria-Hungary as a kind of imperial structure and empire, and not just in the Cisleithanian parts, but also in dualist Hungary, trying to figure out what exactly that kind of imperial statehood meant for society at the local level, even before this whole structure disappeared, and also to look at how that kind of legacy and the traditions of this imperial existence that has lasted for centuries actually influenced the process of adaptation, finding a place within the new nation states, but also how this kind of baggage, so to say, shaped statehood in these new and at least according to their self-understanding, very different forms of statehood. I really hope that at one point you will see the next slide in my presentation, because it will give a much better idea of the geographic extent of the project, and also what the others are doing. So why the local? I try to explain it. And the most important is just to find out actually how societies lived, worked, operated, reacted to changes, not just changes in statehood, but also changes, broader changes, long-term processes of change. And here we think that it is crucial to look at the lowest level and analyze things at a small scale in order to reveal all of the complexities of how people interacted with that kind of change, be it abrupt or be it more gradual. We have 9 team members within the Nepotrans project, including myself. Everyone is working on a region. Let's hope again that at one point you will see the map that shows all these regions. But nevertheless, we have among the regions areas that were either not studied or not studied from this perspective yet. And it is supposed to cover most of the Habsburg imperial space, not just the usual suspects of analysis. So we have Northern Tyrol, Southern Moravia, Northern Lower Austria, the eastern part of the eastern edges of Galicia, definitely not Lemberg, which is a very popular object of analysis, subject for historians as well. Neither, it's rather the borderlands between Bukovina and Galicia. We have northeastern part of former Hungary around the city of Baja-Mare Nagybánya and reaching out to Maramuresh. The southern Banat, which was the industrial region there, and less the center of this very interesting area, Timișoara, which was a thriving Central European city at the eve of the First World War. Ivan Ilicic is working on something that is not Fiume, but still very much connected to Fiume and Rijeka. Jerne is working on Prekmurje. Yes, Sigmund is working on northern Bohemia. That's again an industrial region. And my colleague at the Institute, Karo Ignác, is working on the outskirts of Budapest. So again, an area that is characteristic as part of the metropolitan areas of an empire, but still not the center or the capital, which is again very much analyzed in the literature. And this is one of the ideas that we should bring in knowledge on areas that were part of this imperial structure, but are less visible if we look through the lens of the existing historiography, and that can complement what we know so far about what happened with society throughout this transition.
Gabor, your slides aren't changing. I don't know if you're...
No, I don't see. I mean, I see the same title slide.
Uh-huh. Maybe
okay.
Just...
Okay, maybe I stop sharing right now and go back to a different one. If it's... I don't know whether you can... Okay, so... Okay, so then you could just get a glance at the objectives of the research. Let's hope, again, I can move it forward. But nevertheless, we identified 4 key themes, so to say, that we devote 1 year, all of them, throughout this research to more detailed analysis. And we have started with the state, continued with the elites and the challengers at the local level, which is supposed to give a kind of sense of what happened within the broader society. The next one is ethnicity. That is impossible to avoid to include on a research on the Habsburg Empire, but we definitely and deliberately do not want to make it the most important element, fearing that it will just bring us to the conclusions of others and not going beyond what we know so far about the importance of ethnicity within this empire. And the last one is discursive representation of these changes at the local level, and how and whether these are trying to find some kind of relational difference between the local transition and the broader transition that is depicted in the national discourses. What is really interesting, I think, in terms of methodology that we deliberately try to apply at the last phase of the research, the approach developed by Zimmermann and Werner, entangled history. So we will try to figure out what they call in that seminal article intercrossings. Again, I have somewhere the definition in the next slide, but nevertheless, it's intercrossing is something, a very condensed moment in historical time when people, structures, processes intersect mainly through events, and these events affect all of them, but without creating hybrids, rather changing all the elements of this intercrossing, but not bringing them together and merging them together something new. And the hypothesis is obviously that these imperial structures, imperial processes, imperial practices were much more resilient than just simply getting enmeshed with the new nation statehood. Yes, and if you want to see something that gives actually a taste of what to expect, although I very much regret it's not part of the Nepotrans project, that's Dominic Rey's very recently published book on Fiume. When I read the manuscript, I was on the one hand very happy to see and read this fantastic book, and on the other hand, I just felt that, oh gosh, then we have to push much harder because Dominic did everything that I imagined will be the final outcome. Okay, so this is one of the important elements, and probably it's important, hopefully it will be important at a methodological level as well. And another one that could be interesting for historians or would-be historians at the beginning of their career, I had a kind of hypothesis when I drew up this whole research project, and that included the idea that that kind of rupture, moments of rupture, what these societies experienced at the end of the First World War, can give us a better perspective on how these societies operated prior to the event, behind a kind of imperial veil, or in the case of Hungary, behind the facade of a uniform nationalizing state. And I'm very much satisfied with what we have found so far. So I think that it corroborated the idea that we can really work backwards from these moments as well. And just to give an example of how it reveals something new about not just what happened before 1918, but also what happened after 1918, is my recent research on the transition of business elites. Basically, if one reads the literature on what happened with the economy after the First World War, it's full with stories of nationalization of enemy property, obviously, Austrian, Hungarian, in the successor states, the push of these states to really quickly make the economy changing hands in terms of ethnic belonging of owners and managers. And also you will find the complementary complaints, for example, in the case of the Hungarian politics or the contemporary media, because it was, to a certain extent, one of the most important complaints of Hungarians and most important problem with the peace treaties, that they claimed they lost a lot of property and also the economic viability of the country with this loss of property as well in the neighboring state. And when I was going through what happened with some of the larger companies in the area I was studying, or I'm studying right now. And I was following, in this sense, the path of Mate Rigos, whose book will be published hopefully next year, on a comparison of economic transition and the transition of economic elites in Alsace-Lorraine and in Transylvania. It was not just corroborating Mate's argument on how actually the transition was much more beneficial to this kind of non-Romanian capital in Romania, Greater Romania, than it is used to be perceived, but also revealed how Hungarian capital before 1918 was able to foster very strong cooperative networks with Romanian capitalists that actually survived the change of transition, that helped the Hungarian capitalists to preserve much of their influence on Romanian economy, in some cases even venture new businesses. So, for example, to build up a kind of dominant steel company within Romania with the help of Bucharest banks on the basis of their existing business links and cooperation, well, that reaches back well before the First World War, and what was beneficial for obviously all partners in that kind of business network. So it shows a very different story before or after the war, but also shows something that we are just starting to grasp about the imperial efforts, the economic imperialism of Hungarian capitalists before the First World War. And we can also see how important, significant, and also instrumental these local links were for them to survive, actually, the catastrophe. So they needed the help of these, let's say, middle-level, sometimes even lower-level business figures within their existing network, who were used as strawmans after 1918 to hide actual ownership of shares in important companies or whatever, or who helped managing the ruptures in the money transfer systems between banks, whatever, or the rigidity of the currency systems. So they were all important and necessary. Without that kind of local agents of this business network, it would not have happened, or would have happened not just differently, but probably would have faced obstacles that were not so easy to overcome as it was with the help of these local or regional business elites that were already integrated into a broader extending imperialist business area or business space. So that's basically what I wanted to say about the project, and it's more important to listen to my colleagues from the team.
Thank you very much, Gabor. I hope that the next presenter will not have problems with the PowerPoint presentation, and also the others. I really hope so. So after this basically brief presentation of the project and Gabor's reflections on business elites, now is the time of Elizabeth Haid. She studied history and Slavonic studies in Vienna. She was a fellow in the doctoral program Austrian Galicia and its multicultural heritage, and a research assistant at the Institute for East European History at the University of Vienna. Her dissertation on Galicia as a subject of Austrian and Russian propaganda in World War I was published in 2019 in German language, if I'm not mistaken. Currently, she is a postdoc researcher in our ERC Nepotrans project at the Institute of Political History. And Elizabeth, the floor is yours, and I'll mute my microphone.
Thank you for the introduction. So my focus is on the northeastern part of the former Habsburg monarchy, that is on Galicia. Can you see the slides? Perfect. Like many other multi-ethnic border regions, the eastern part of the Habsburg province, Galicia, became a bone of contention after World War I. In October 1918, local Polish and Ukrainian political activists made preparations to assert their claims on the region. A Polish liquidation committee was established in Krakow and acted as a Polish interim government in Galicia. However, its power was actually limited to Western Galicia, because at the same time, in Eastern Galicia, in Lviv, a Ukrainian National Council was established, which proclaimed the West Ukrainian People's Republic in that area in November 1918. The balance of power, however, changed with the military developments in the Polish-Ukrainian War for Eastern Galicia, which began with a Polish uprising in Lviv immediately after the proclamation of the West Ukrainian state. Due to the success of the Polish army, the Ukrainian territory was shrinking. As early as mid-November 1918, the capital Lviv was in Polish hands. And in summer 1919, the West Ukrainian state was dissolved. In the following, I will focus on the impact of these multiple transitions on administrative structures in the region. The proclamation of the West Ukrainian Republic in November 1918 meant the de facto separation of a Polish Western Galicia and a Ukrainian Eastern Galicia, which had been demanded by Ukrainian activists for a long time. Moreover, the Ukrainian takeover aimed at the Ukrainization of the Eastern Galician administration, which had been dominated by the Polish upper classes in Habsburg times. Important positions were filled with Ukrainians, and the authorities called for new elections of local self-government. In many places, local national councils were formed. In other respects, however, the administrative structures of the pre-war period were largely preserved. In consequence of the Polish victory in the Polish-Ukrainian War, Galicia was restored as an administrative unit of the nascent Polish Republic. The Polish central government in Warsaw appointed a general delegate for Galicia, who had the responsibilities of the former Galician governor in Austrian times. In summer 1919, the Galician governorship again comprised the entire territory of the former Habsburg province. Also, the status of the eastern part of Galicia remained contested. However, this Galicia as an administrative unit was only a temporary solution. An essential task of the general delegate was to prepare the introduction of a new administrative structure. In December 1920, the Galician governorship was dissolved, and in order to unify the Polish state administration, the administrative structure of the so-called voivodeships was transferred to Galicia. While at the lower level, the district level, the territorial division from Austrian times was largely preserved. Galicia finally ceased to exist as an administrative unit, with the introduction of the voivodeships as the highest territorial administrative units, which you can see here at the map. So the territory of former Galicia was divided into 4 voivodeships. Nevertheless, with the dissolution of Galicia as an administrative unit, the perception of Galicia as a distinct region did not disappear. Even though the name Galicia was usually replaced by the term Lesser Poland. The voivodeship of Krakow was called Western Lesser Poland, and the voivodeships of Lviv, Stanisławów, and Tarnopol were subsumed under the term Eastern Lesser Poland. And in particular, this eastern loss of Poland attracted a great deal of political attention. Even though the region had been fully integrated into the Polish administrative structures from 1919 onwards, its status was not internationally recognized at that time. Ukrainian activists continued to oppose integration into the Polish Republic. Therefore, the Allies called for a statute of autonomy for Eastern Galicia as a condition for the integration of the region into the Polish Republic. In September 1922, the Polish parliament passed a law on the self-government of voivodeships with special regulations on the voivodeships of Lviv, Stanislavov, and Tardopol. In the following, in March 1923, the integration of Eastern Galicia into the Polish Republic was internationally recognized. However, the law on voivodeship self-government was never implemented. The reforms of the Polish administration mainly aimed at centralization and unification of the different regions of Poland, which comprised territories of the former Austrian, German, and Russian empires. This meant, in particular, the expansion of state administration in relation to self-government, which had had an important place in Austrian Galicia. Nevertheless, regional differences remained. Legal unification made relatively slow progress. The reforms of the Polish administration, the former Austrian-Russian or German legal systems, which existed in the different regions of Poland, have only been gradually replaced by new uniform laws. In some fields of law, differences remained even until the Second World War. Notwithstanding the territorial reorganization, there was a great deal of administrative continuities at the local level. There was, for example, a high level of continuity of administrative personnel. About 2/3 of the Polish state officials in the region had been former Austrian state officials. However, Poles had been clearly overrepresented in the administration of this multi-ethnic region already in Habsburg times. This trend intensified in the Polish Republic. Ukrainians and Jews often had difficulties to be readmitted to Polish civil service, as they were suspected of disloyalty and of having sympathized with the Ukrainian side during the Polish-Ukrainian War. As for local self-government and its competences have been gradually restricted by the state administration. However, continuities with the Habsburg monarchy existed insofar as the Austrian law on municipal elections remained in force in former Galicia. In practice, however, municipal elections were suspended on the grounds that the Austrian electoral system, which clearly privileged the upper classes, did not comply with the principle of general and equal elections enshrined in the Polish constitution. On the other hand, general and equal elections in Eastern Galicia would have meant a loss of power for the local Polish elites. And this was seen as a contradiction to the interests of a Polish nation state. Therefore, plans for electoral reform met with fierce opposition among local Polish politicians. Thus, either the municipal councillors who had been elected in Austrian times remained in office, or in other cases, the municipal council was appointed by the Polish district authorities. The latter was often the case in Eastern Galicia, where many of the existing municipal councils had been formed during the West Ukrainian Republic. So the replacement of these councils was intended to ensure loyalty to the Polish state. Finally, in 1927, elections to municipal self-government were held for the first time in Eastern Lesser Poland. However, as no agreement had been reached on a new election law, the existing Austrian law was just slightly adapted. So the application of the Austrian electoral law, even a decade after the end of the Habsburg monarchy, led to a relatively high continuity of local political elites. It was not until 1933 that a uniform municipal code was enacted for the whole of Poland. The new municipal code finally introduced universal and equal elections also at the local level. At the same time, the new code reinforced the tendencies towards centralization and state control in the Polish Republic. Thank you for the introduction.
Thank you much, Elizabeth, for this presentation, which somehow make us remember that even though there was a creation of a new nation state, some kind of legal codes, and specifically these municipal elections didn't change immediately after 1918, or actually democracy didn't just arrive in 1918, but it has been a long process in implementing it. So I think now it's my turn, actually, right? According to the schedule. So I'll share with you my PowerPoint, hopefully. Share screen.
Well,
You see the PowerPoint?
yes.
Okay.
Well, maybe I should introduce you really briefly, because Ivan Jelacic, who got his PhD at the University of Trieste, he's studied political movements, late Habsburg Empire, Rijeka, Fiume, and then the transition. He's written a number of articles. I'm not going to read out the names. You can check him out on academia.edu. He's been teaching at the University of Rijeka for a number of years now, working on many projects, and he knows pretty much every stone in Rijeka. So if you want a personal tour, especially in the cemetery, it was fascinating taking a walking tour with Ivan. So I'm looking forward to continuing all this exciting research in Rijeka, Fiume.
Well, I mean, I wish I know so much as you have praised me, but I mean, I will do my best to keep, to, how can I say, to continue to research even further all the stones in the cemetery, so I can tell you some more fascinating, interesting stories about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, I just put here a small map because I don't know how many of you are familiar. I suppose here will be also the audience from Rijeka. So basically some of you are more or less familiar with the administrative political division of the city during the late Habsburg period and the period after 1918. So this map is here just briefly to again say why very probably I will speak with the city referring to the Italian name Fiume in the sense of speaking about the territory of the Corpus Separatum, while when I'm referring to the other part, I'll try to be more specific, but hopefully you will understand what I'm trying to say. If not, I mean...
Ivan, the slideshow.
Yes. It's not, I need to put the slideshow or?
Well, just hit, yeah, I think whatever it's, what is it,
okay, let's
whatever the slideshow button is. Oh.
Functioning, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. So basically, let me start with this small postcard. So this postcard is an allegorical representation of the city of Fiume's annexation to Italy, a historical event that occurred at the beginning of 1924, following the implementation of the Treaty of Rome, signed by the Kingdom of Italy and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovens. Two administrative and political units, Fiume here represented as bearing its municipal flag, and Italy with a crown, are represented in a way familiar to most of us. as a family. Fiume, the daughter or the sister, is embraced, again, an allegory of unification, annexation, by the mother, a mother nation, Italy. This image, one of the deep images of the nation, to quote the work of Banti, or a representation of micro-solidarity, to refer to the work of Siniša Malešević, gives an impression that a historical political event has to be understood in biological terms, as something natural, as it is a hug between two family members. Obviously, this is a typical nationalist imaginary, two female figures as bearers of moral purity, virtues that have to be defended by strong male warriors. And you probably can think about the strong male warriors of this kind of battleships, which are in the background of the postcard. Also, a large mass of people surrounding the two female figures provide this idyllic family picture as an event having massive support. Basically, the postcard displays nationalism as part of social relations, a social reality, making us accustomed, and we truly are today, that nationalism and national identification are an obvious part of the world we live in. In the case of Fiume, this postcard also has a more or less hidden detail, and if we have some time, maybe I can tell you something more about it. But it represents symbolically a continuity, a connection between Italian nationalism and these three terms: autonomism, a very large and strong political movement in the late Habsburg Fiume, understood also as municipal belonging; self-government, so the legal status of a city administrating itself inside the Hungarian state in the late Habsburg period; and the widespread usage of Italian language by the local population, or the census data where the Italian mother tongue speakers were displayed as a majority, if compared with the other census groups, not as a majority because they were not above the 50%. So these elements were made normal, natural, obvious, that Fiume's transition to Italian nationalism was, let's say, an expected outcome, and that the city should have become normally, let's say, part of the Italian national state. Also, I haven't forgot about the elephant in our virtual room. Fiume is also Rijeka. I mean, it would be wrong to assume that the population was simply Italian, i.e. that there was not a relevant Croatian South Slav political option in the city, or at least with a strong presence in Slušak. Yet these two images that you can see in the PowerPoint represent marches of rival nationalists. The Italian National Council, more or less a former Fiume municipal elite, a leading group advocating annexation to Italy, and the SCS National Council, more or less former Slušak municipal elite and notable Croatian-oriented Fiume inhabitants, advocating annexation to Yugoslavia. And I would say these stories are more or less well known. Precisely in rival terms, they have survived through nationalist narratives, nation-state-based institutions or associations, and were used and are still used for nationalist claims over cities' past inhabitants. This kind of representation has a few pitfalls. The first one is that it depicts the Habsburg Empire as a prison of peoples, and national councils are assumed to be an expression of a much desired and finally achieved freedom from Habsburg despotism. This does not mean that the Habsburg period was a golden age when everybody lived happy and in harmony. Surely there were social and economical disparities, political issues, but nationalism was not the only or the most prominent question. The second pitfall of these images is the polarization of the political scene, as if in the town there were only two available political options. Further, it assumes that all the supporters of both camps understood in the same way the notion of nation, as if it is not a bowl that can contain contrasting visions, as centralism or federalism, republic or monarchy, special status for the city, or a uniform nation state, same status. Or to put it in another way, as the heritage of the Habsburg not yet passed, with all its institutions, connections, and ideas simply disappeared overnight. I don't want to spend too much time to explain all the complicated, and they are truly complicated, events that occurred between the collapse of the Habsburg state institutions in Fiume and the annexation of the city to Italy. After the creation of rival national councils, the most well-known event is the Nuncius' occupation of the city, but mainly from the perspective of the Nuncius' followers. We are lucky as already Gabor mentioned it, that the recently published book of Dominic Ryle will provide us with such a needed history of the experience of locals and their challenges in an environment which was not merely a revolutionary festivity, to quote another book. Less known is the period of the Free State, recalled for the fascist and nationalist coup d'etat in 1922, but not so much remembered for basically being an era of civil war between independentists and annexationists. Also, from the perspective of former Hungarian civil servants, if there was not the work of Agnes Sorda, she would not know too much about actually what happened to these people, which is, again, one of the important stories of this complicated transition. So, keeping in mind the complexity, now is the time to present you the first of the two alternatives to nation states, the local socialists. Fiume had a socialist party, part of the Hungarian social democratic movement, since the beginning of the 20th century. Given the extremely limited suffrage, socialists were not able to elect a representative to the Hungarian parliament. I mean, Fiume had only one deputy in the lower chamber. And in the local elections, it was also pretty much hard to have municipal socialist representatives. Nevertheless, during the war, the president of Fiume's Socialist Party became a member of the city council. It was a symbolical recognition that socialists were becoming an important factor in a growing and developing fourth town. This political and social recognition, however, did not last long. When at the end of October 1918, the Hungarian Habsburg institutions disappeared and two rival national councils were created, the socialists were not passive observers. Under the influence of local socialists, a workers' council was created, a class-based organization that placed above nationalism another form of self-identification and prospect over the world. In October 1918, this political group proclaimed the need for a plebiscite for Fiume to decide its future, a plebiscite where both men and women aged 18 and above living in Fiume for at least a year would have the right to vote. A truly democratic stance compared to the unelected national councils. While in October 1918, it was not clear what could be the options of the plebiscite, on November 17, 1918, the day the Italian troops entered in town, the socialists declared that they want Fiume to become an independent republic under the protection of the Socialist International. This was not an isolated moment. The socialists, later as communists, will continue to keep alive this political stance. For instance, in 1923, they even asked the Italian Communist Party to protest against the violation of the most sacred and most ancestral right of Fiume, the right to her freedom and her incontestable independence. As one can imagine, the local Italian nationalists were not too crazy about these ideas, and they attacked publicly the socialists and communists as isolated, unrealistic, and childish. But the socialists were not an isolated, small-numbered group, as the 1st of May 1918 image here in the PowerPoint can clearly demonstrate. Further, the continuity of the movement shows that they were not an irrelevant political group. Yet, the independence cause was not embraced only by the working class. Probably the first figure to openly speak about the need of Fiume to be an independent or autonomous, maybe as a distinct unit under Yugoslav protection, was Ruggero Gottardi. Ruggero Gottardi's family was part of the local patriciate. His father was a sea captain, while Ruggero himself was at first a military officer, a Habsburg cavalry lieutenant, that after retirement became a merchant. Married to a Croatian middle-class lady, during his military youth he wrote his diary in German language and spoke better Fiumean dialect than the Italian standard language. What did Gottardi, a politically inactive figure until that moment, decide to do in 1918? On November 15, 1918, when Serbian troops were entering the town, he has published an open letter to all the true Fiumeans. In the letter, Gottardi considered the Italian National Council as an illegitimate representative of the Fiumean population. He openly wrote what many knew. Nobody was thinking of an Italian mother nation until the Hungarian Habsburg institutions disappeared. However, Gottardi was not a Yugoslav nationalist. In Gottardi's proposal, he was referring to an imagined Fiumean community, and I'll quote this part, it's translated from Italian. Fiumians, real patriots, let's unite. Italians, Slavs, and Hungarians of Fiumian fathers, let's declare ourselves united under our Fiumian flag. Free citizens of Italian language under the Slav protection, but protected by our autonomy from the entire world. We are the natural outlet for Slavs and Hungarians. We will live in peace with everybody, banning any politics and sure of our sacred liberty. In this way, we will become a rich and joyful city. Here, this is the only part. As the socialists, Gottardi was not alone. Soon around him gathered some followers, men, traders, figures of maritime-related businesses, with sometimes also links to the local patriciate. This group established a new party, the Autonomist Democratic Party, and demanded in July 1918 that Fiume was to become an independent state enlarged territorially on east and west to include an area servicing the port under the protection of the United States or the United Kingdom. I mean, you can find more about Gottardi in a work published by Ljubin Katarko, which is also available online in the 80s, which is unfortunately one of the few works on Gottardi that we have. Anyway, for this group, autonomism was not considered dead in 1918, and economic interests were placed above national interests. As a socialist, this group was active also in the next years, but its efforts were not recognized. Rather, their accomplishments were used by a late Habsburg skillful political actor, Riccardo Zanella, who, from a Hungarian autonomist leader in the late Habsburg period, in 1918 supported Italian annexation and, after the arrival of the D'Annunzio, became the champion of independentism. So, to come to a conclusion, with this last slide, my intent is, of course, to confuse you, or rather to challenge the assumption of straightforwardness of some ideas and obviously of biographical facts. As I hope I have showed, autonomism did not necessarily translate to Italian nationalism as it did not to independentism. The presence of Italian speakers did not necessarily imply support for annexation. Various local actors, as socialists, could have been champions of independence, not because they were unnational, but because they placed their own political values of economic development and class above nation states. The same notion of incorporation to a nation state could mean something completely different inside the pro-annexation camp. Some figures were maybe thinking of larger, not national defined borders for the Kingdom of Italy, craving for expansionistic imperialistic policies. Others expected that Fiume would keep its administrative specificity inside Italy, or, as it has happened in 1930, that the city will be granted a special economic status as a duty-free zone. Nothing natural or obvious was happening here. Rather, international and local events at the end made prevail the Italian annexation. Complexity, however, I would say, is far more difficult to be represented. Thank you for your attention. I hope I haven't been too much out of the time.
Perfect timing.
Okay, yeah, so it's again me who has to present the next speaker. Okay, it's a little bit complicated. So our next speaker is Jernej or Aniko? I can't remember. Aniko. Can be Jernej first.
Yeah.
Would you like to go first, or would you like that Jernej goes first, Aniko?
Jernej goes first if it's okay for him.
No problem.
Sure. So Jernej is our next speaker. So his assistant,
Didn't expect it, but
Kossi.
okay.
Are you ready?
Somehow. Let's try and see.
So Jernej Kossi is assistant professor at the University of Ljubljana and a postdoc researcher inside our ERC Nepotrans program. He has researched and published on various dimensions of Slovene history and on themes of nationalism, World War I, and post-imperial transitions. And for the Croatian audience, I would say the most important information here, his book was also translated last year in Croatian. The title is Kako je nastala Slovenska nacija, which is a really interesting piece of building of Slovene nationalism in the 19th century. So, Jernej, the floor is yours, and I can
Thanks.
finally know.
Thank you. And my very first and an obvious question is, can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Can you see it? Okay, excellent. Thanks. So I hope I'll be able to satisfy both the expectations of students and scholars as well, who are present here in quite an unexpectedly high number. So on August 12, 1919, military units of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes crossed the border with the Kingdom of Hungary and occupied segments of two counties, Vas or Železna in Slovenian and Zala. Several weeks before that, the occupation had been sanctioned at the Peace Conference in Paris. To be more precise, in early July 1919, the Council of Heads of the four great powers included this small fragment of land in the very west of Hungary in the package of territorial compensations promised to Yugoslavia in exchange for Yugoslav participation in the military overthrow of the Hungarian Soviet Republic. The Yugoslav territorial acquisition of Prekmurje was confirmed a year later with the signing of the Treaty of Trianon. With the exception of a short interrupting during World War II, Prekmurje, as the region is officially known in Slovenian, has been under Slovenian administrative control ever since. Before the Yugoslav annexation, in the short but eventful span of time between autumn 1918 and summer 1919, however, the flow of historical occurrence ran faster than ever before in the western parts of Zala and Vas counties in the Kingdom of Hungary. Unlike in many other former Austro-Hungarian regions, these developments were not accompanied by a massive outbreak of armed violence. Instead, instigated by notions of self-determination and widespread social and political instability, the rapid growth of political consciousness in autumn 1918 redefined the local political stage and created a foundation for the democratization of local society. Unlike the period before war, the right to participate in public matters was no longer understood as a privilege of the members of educated and economic elites. Encouraged by the experience of war that contributed to the widening of their worldview and the strengthening of their self-respect, Slavophone and bilingual peasant soldiers who returned to their towns and villages were no longer afraid to openly articulate their demands and expectations in front of the rural public and its social and clerical authorities. As a result, a wider swath of the local Slovene-speaking peasantry began to demand a rapid improvement of their own situation, be it either within Hungary or, at the beginning, in very rare cases, in another polity. In such an atmosphere, the local Hungarian elite became increasingly concerned with the triumphant activities and accomplishments of the Slovene national movement in the territories of the former Austrian part of the dual monarchy. Indeed, they lived right next to the former internal state border. Aristocrats and churchmen, state officials and civil servants, merchants and craftsmen, who identified themselves either as members of Hungarian nation or as loyal Hungarian citizens, had to face the fact that Prekmurje's Slavophone Vents, who referred to themselves as Sloveni or Slovenci, could now demand the right to self-determination. In the fears of these elites, the success of the Slovene national movement would eventually lead to the annexation of the region by the South Slav state. In reality, however, by the end of 1918, this South Slav polity had only begun to slowly emerge, first across the border in Styria, a former Habsburg crownland, and later on the other side in Međimurje, which had been liberated, that is occupied, by Croatian volunteers in December 1918. In reality, the fears of the Hungarian inhabitants of Vas and Zala counties grew stronger due to the active and organized propaganda of Slovene national activists and politicians. From autumn 1918 onward, Styria's Slovene national councils and Slovene national activists began publicly promoting the idea of the annexation of Prekmurje to this newly founded South Slav state among Hungarian Slavophone peasants. Already in early November, for instance, several hundred peasants from Prekmurje participated in an event organized by the local Slovene National Council in the Styrian town of Ljutomer, where the self-proclaimed representatives of Hungary's Slovenes publicly proclaimed their demand to become part of the state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, joining with other Slovenes from formerly Cisleithanian crowns. In the autumn and winter 1918-1919, however, such ideas were supported only by a small minority of Slavophone peasants and only a few among the local Catholic clergy. The lack of broader support for the territorial rearrangement was further shown in late December, when paramilitary units from Međimurje, guided by Captain Jurisic, broke through the border on their own initiative and without the knowledge of Yugoslav state authorities, arrived in Murska Sobota and proclaimed the annexation of the region to the South Slav state. It didn't take long before Hungarian regular units, with the support of the local Slavophone volunteers, forced Jurisic and his units to run for their lives. The supposed Yugoslav liberation of Prekmurje was thus not backed by the local Slavophone peasants. It attracted only a chunk of the rural population who were, due to physical vicinity and kinship ties, well acquainted with the ongoing political and social circumstances in Styria. In reality, the yearning of local population for Yugoslavia, if it existed at all, didn't necessarily rest on nationalistic pillars. Much more than the national, their concerns were of a social and pragmatic kind. Joining Yugoslavia promised improvements in the social status of the peasantry on the Hungarian side of the border. In comparison to Hungary, the neighboring Styria's peasantry held many legal and political rights, was in general economically better off, and paid lower taxes. Above all, a scent of land reform wafted in the air across the border. In December 1919, Yugoslav regent Alexander vowed to put it into practice, and a few weeks later confirmed a provisional bill that dissolved all large estates in exchange for financial compensation. Unsurprisingly, the promise of land reform easily inspired the political imagination of modest local peasants in the densely populated Hungarian countryside, where the social and economic relations were determined by the firm grip of a handful of aristocrats over the majority of arable agricultural land. Faced with the territorial claims of the newly established Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, the Hungarian government in Budapest was forced to intervene in local affairs. In December 1918, Oskar Jási, Minister of Nationalities of the short-lived Hungarian People's Republic, formulated a political solution for the precarious political circumstances of a region shattered by revolutionary rhetoric on the one hand and the nationalist claims of the Slovene national movement from abroad on the other. Jási's plan would unite all the districts and municipalities with Slavophone populations in Zala and Vas counties into a single administrative unit with a seat in Murska Sobota, and a government commissioner as a head of the county administration. Such an administrative unit would serve two purposes: to accommodate local expectations regarding the possibility to participate in the political process and preserve the territorial integrity of the Hungarian state. Let me make this thing a bit shorter. Jási's plan, however, encountered opposition from the existing governing bodies of Zala and Vas counties who opposed the transfer of their authority over county territories. An even more radical plan, formulated by a few local Catholic priests from Zala county, headed by Jozef Klekel, suffered the same fate a few weeks later. Their design staked claims to a particular political territorial unit called Slovenska krajina, Slovene March, okay, which would consist of Slovene and mixed Slovene-Hungarian municipalities in Zala and Vas counties. Slovenska Krajina would internally be completely autonomous and led by a minister of the Hungarian government, who would be accountable to the Hungarian parliament as well as the parliament of Slovenska Krajina. The Hungarian state would grant complete political and cultural autonomy to Slovenska Krajina, while matters of foreign affairs, finance, military, legislature, citizenship, and economy would remain in the hands of the Hungarian government. In addition, in a situation where Slovenska Krajina would eventually become a subject of conflicting territorial claims, the Hungarian government was expected to defend the polity's internal autonomy at potential international negotiations regarding the state's future borders. State officials in Budapest didn't immediately turn down Kleckel. On the contrary, he was invited to Budapest in an attempt to reconcile his and Jashi's visions of Prekmurje's future, but with no success. Kleckel's request to the Hungarian government to fight for the internal autonomy of Slovenska Krajina, even if the region was to be ceded to Yugoslavia, turned out to be unacceptable for the other side. The proclamation of the Hungarian Soviet Republic on March 21st, 1919, added another layer of complexity to the already complicated political situation in what became known as Prekmurje. Soon after the change of regime, the representatives of the new government reorganized the local administration. Bela Obal, not that important person, remained in charge of Vas County as People's Commissioner, while Vilmos Tkalec, much more important local, was named as his deputy, responsible for Slovenska Krajina. A former officer in the Austro-Hungarian army and local teacher before the war, Tkalec didn't show too much enthusiasm, either for the proletarian revolution or for Slovene national sentiments. He let his private interests guide his rule over the region. He was heavily implicated in illegal trade and smuggling over the state border with Austria. When it became clear to the central government that Tkalec was predominantly interested in making money for himself and that he had actually accumulated enormous wealth at the expense of the state, they tried to replace him. But Tkalec was faster. On May 29th, and with the help and support of several members of the local elite, and with the assistance of Hungarian anti-revolutionary aristocrats that escaped to Austria and hoped to reclaim power from there, Tkalec proclaimed the independence of a new state, the Mura Republic, Murska Republika, using the notion of national self-determination as its legitimizing principle. Yet, as was often the case in the immediate post-war years, people were neither informed nor asked for their opinion about the Republic. Lacking popular support, the Republic was crushed by units of Red Army on June 5th, a week after its proclamation. But the Soviet regime that put an end to the most radical local political vision of the post-imperial political geography passed the power soon thereafter to the units of Admiral Horthy's National Army. Horthy's control of the region was ultimately replaced after the invasion of the Yugoslav army. Okay. I missed a slide, I guess, but let's finish it with the Paris Peace Conference. In the meantime, far away from local and regional political upheavals, the actual future of the region and its population had been decided. By spring 1919, key decisions had been made during the peace conference in Paris. Based on supposedly objective ethnographic evidence prepared by Slovene experts among the Yugoslav delegation, and in exchange for promised intervention against the communist regime in Budapest, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes received permission to occupy the western parts of Zala and Vas counties. Again, people living in the region were left without a say in the matter. No one asked them about their demands and expectations, and unlike several other regions, no plebiscite on the future territorial affiliation of the region was planned. Yet, this indeed was a revolutionary period in the history of this small region, if not a political or regarding the paramilitary violence than at least a mental one. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ernei, for this lovely presentation on probably the areas with whom we are most familiar with after Rijeka,
I must confess, I almost broke my tongue, so I hope you understood me, but I'm not used to speaking English these days. Probably because I have to take care of my child and we mostly play with cars and speak very basic sentences in Slovene.
No worries. I mean, you have always me, who has way worse in tongue and mistakes and speaking English. Anyway, our last presenter is Aniko Borbala-Izak, right, Aniko? She is the youngest member of our group. She's probably almost the age of the MA students here. Right, Aniko? I mean, you're definitely the youngest member inside our group, but definitely one of the smartest, I would say. She started her studies in social and economical history in Cluj, so in Romania. After that, she moved on ELTE, so in Budapest, where she did her MA, and now she's doing her PhD in the program in social and economical history. And she'll say something more about this fascinating case about a few municipalities in Transylvania, if I'm not mistaken, right? And also a huge fan of cemeteries. This is what we discovered again.
Yeah. Hi everyone. I try to share my screen with you. I hope this is it. Okay, do you see it? Okay, thank you. Well, I'm a bit anxious as usually when I have to speak before public, and I'm a bit well, I am a bit embarrassed because this will be the least finished presentation of this this night, because also, as usually, I suppose I was just wanting too much and earning almost nothing. But I made some ugly and slightly unprofessional maps that I show you now. So first this, okay. First I want to talk about my region, and I use the map of native language speakers, inhabitants of Hungary, according to the census in 1910, made by the Atlo team. And marked with green approximately my region. so this is placed now in the northwestern part of Romania. And as you see, it's a multi-ethnic and also a multi-denominational region. It's a borderland between the mostly the lands mostly inhabited by Hungarians and mostly inhabited by Romanians. So I draw here. This is the ugly one. The borders of County Szatmár of the Hungarian Kingdom. And here, this is the most unprofessional because, well, georeferation is not an option in GIMP. So I really hope so that the blue line is the Romanian border, but I'm not absolutely sure in this. But I really hope so. It is. And yes, the other interesting and need to know data about the county's ethnic composition, that there are significant alterations between 1910 and 1930 in the censuses, in the ethnic composition. This was calculated by Árpád Varga on the same territory. So there's no distortion because of the territorial change. So the alterations could be explained by multiple factors, including migration, changes in the statistical categories used, possible errors, deliberate distortions, but the most interesting phenomenon that could be examined in this region, possibly isn't dominant, but also isn't unique case, is the swaying of people with uncertain or multiple national identity. About the Romanian National Councils, I made a chronology based on the works of Ignác Romšič, Gábor Egri, and Tamás Sárándi. So these yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just a bit confused by myself. So
if I may interrupt you, you were speaking about the chronology. So basically the chronological events.
Yes, of the formations of the Romanian national councils, and well, don't know. I feel urged to read out loud these, but it seems so unnecessary.
Sorry, Aniko, Vani, could you please mute your microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, Vani, thank you. Now, Aniko, sorry.
Okay. So,
well, maybe instead of reading all of the information, you can just, give us the summary. I mean, I think for many of the students and all the participants, none of us really know this. Just very simply just tell us the conclusion, I think, and without worrying about all the the details. I think we're all chill here. This is a safe space for talking about history. So no need to be.
Okay. I think in the meantime I forgot how to speak, but
pretend you're just telling Ivan what you conclusion. That's the only person that's here. Just you're chatting calling with Ivan.
Better telling to my cat. So okay, so I wanted to speak about the sources I found, and which I processed at this time really well, weekly. I wanted just to say that okay, sorry, I didn't know.
Aniko, if you want, we can jump to a discussion. Then maybe you can add something in discussion if you're fine with this.
That would be great.
Okay, just relax. No worries. I mean, like Vjeran said, we're in a safe space. There are too many people who love kitties right now. The only problem could be eventually, I mean, it's not a problem actually for you. Maybe we conclude you will be celebrated as a national hero since maybe you have incorporated more square kilometers To Romania or Hungary, now I'm not even sure to whom you actually give more, but anyway, you will be someone's national hero. So no worries. I mean, we can say something more during the discussion. I mean, you can say something more during the discussion. Actually, I'll stop talking right now because I have this probably Mediterranean style of talking too much. So Vjeran, the floor is yours. Let's try to sum up something.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, Ivan, for putting together the panel. Thanks to all the panelists. And I mean, I think all of the cases showed these interesting micro histories and micro cases that challenge a lot of these grand narratives of people wanting to join this country or that country. And oftentimes these are these non-national categories or economic interests. And we've seen this in Dominique's work on Fiume and all the other cases that we've seen also this evening. So I think it's a great example and great research that we're coming up with local archives, these regions that we've forgotten about that we really are now being fleshed out by projects such as this, especially after the collapse of such a multinational empire as Austria-Hungary, but the other empires as well. So yeah, maybe there is some kind of discussion either from the students or other, I mean, I know there's a lot of colleagues here who have been listening to all the presentations. Are there someone who wants to say something? I didn't really set the groundwork for how we're going to do it, but again, I think we're all laid back here. So if someone wants to just, Dominique, of course, I have questions there. It even says in the chat. Okay, so I'll let Dominique go in.
I mean, come on, guys. I'm alone in this isolated hell, and you're talking about what I love more than anything: kitties and post-imperial. I'm going to ask Gabor a question just because he was too short, and he's always just trying to get me. He's stringing me along. So what I was thinking about the short presentation you gave. And I love this working wheels of imperial capitalism, and that we haven't seen it because we have these stories about all the loss and how hard it is and all, and that you're showing that there's not as much loss as we thought, and it's actually because of how actors on the ground work. But I'm wondering about, is there a difference of how they think capitalism, how grand capitalism can be? Is there still a global imperial vision of capitalism like we see happening in Hungary before the war? I mean, Fiume is an investment plan of globalizing Hungarian capitalism. So do you see a kind of change vision? Does it become more continental, more regional? Or is it just trying to get back to eventually, are these working wheels of capitalism, that mental state, the same, or are they attuning themselves to a shifted border? For Ivan, I blame Gabor and Yene for this question, especially Gabor because he brought up the Entangled Crossing article. And I was thinking about the events that you were using to situate how these people are shifting and changing and not. And all of them are political events. And I'm wondering if you did something like a 1970s social scientist and you used, GDP or calorie counts, which is what they used to do, would these moments be the same moments? And would these reconfigurations be similar? Or are these event-driven, political event-driven, and that maybe we'd find other things if we used other standards of event? And then for Yene, I was really taken by this idea of the waifing ideas of tax law and land reform. And I was thinking about what we think about peasants, or how many of us have been trained to not think about them. We usually think of them as pawns of propaganda at the beginning of the 20th century. And in your work, do you see them as actually knowing more than they're supposed to about tax laws and land reform options? Or are you seeing propaganda machines of different political movements emphasizing these differences in order to motivate peasants in different ways?
Well, okay, so even without even handing me the floor, I just jump in. Thank you, Dominic. It's very fascinating, and I think it would be unfair to say that these Hungarian capitalists didn't feel some kind of loss. So they had a certain status, they had a certain role within, and they had even more ambition before 1918. And the post-First World War period is more about salvaging what they can from this empire or this imperial endeavor they had. And what they do is actually they are using not just the local but also the global connections they have. However, here I think the First World War is a very important element, because while before 1914 they were naturally looking at the United States or Britain or France for partnerships as well. And here, for example, Romania could have been also a kind of interesting switchboard that with the help of Romanian partners, they could actually access French high capital as well and become partners. So they were basically reduced to have contacts with neutral states, and through the neutrals probably with these even more important centers. So what I can see so far is that they try to use this kind of more global connections, but the vision is less global in the sense that what they had is this kind of continental base, and they were using it skillfully. There was one moment I would dare to say, but it's still very hypothetical, between 1929 and 31, the Kreditanstalt crisis, when it seems that the Great Depression will only be a depression for the United States and probably for the United Kingdom, but continental Europe will be spared, at least within the French economic influence zone. There is a moment when it seemed that these kind of local actors came together and tried to leverage their position against these European capitalists who had much better position within these networks and in the also in the continental economy. And in that moment, it seems that some actors again were somehow recuperated, so to say, that kind of global vision, but it was just a brief moment because it lasted only for months, and that was, and the region was devastated after the Kreditanstalt collapse. So yes, it's a different vision to a certain extent, but it's quite interesting to see that they still had that kind of geographic look at what constituted the kind of economic sphere they were moving relatively swiftly, what they knew much better, and how they actually visibly and consciously tried to still keep together, even if it was became much more fragmented, and they had to learn new techniques to manage these companies. They had, but that's something that it's very seems very important in this sense. Yes, there are other potential or possible avenues to look at it. For example, the currency issues, but that's so far rather just speculation from me. That speculation against the French franc was probably one way that was not just limited to that well-known attempt of Hungarians close to the Hungarian government and assisted by the Hungarian government to bring down the French franc, but also like George Soros a few decades later, pound sterling, but maybe it was more coordinated within this network as well.
Ivan, you have a...
Thank you, Dominique. Actually, it's a very good question. I mean, I was more interested in the political events than what you are saying, which should be more important also. I mean, quite important in the sense of addressing actually how everyday life or the consumption of food basically, or economical prospects influence the political decision of the locals. I mean, I believe that you're probably thinking, I mean, logically, about the experience of the nuncio and how people at the beginning maybe have been in favor and they were just waiting, okay, the guy arrived, will be annexed to Italy and life will somehow return to normality. But then later, I mean, all of them have been disappointed because no food, no money, no job. I mean, you know this better than I do. However, I'm not entirely sure if, let's say, the food consumption and the economical dynamic would be much different from the political dynamic, in the sense that, I mean, let's say now I'm speaking more of the period of the Free State. I mean, when locals obviously see that the Free State will not last because there is a political group and violence and people which do not want to make it happen. I mean, I think that despite the fact, which is definitely important, that this town has problems regarding the arrival of food or functioning in a normal way as normality was understood until 1918. I mean that this definitely somehow influenced more annexation stances. I mean, in the sense as saying, yeah, okay, let's do whatever, just that life continues to function in, let's say, a normal way. But I mean, it's a good, definitely a good comment. I mean, I'll think if I have.
I was thinking about Free State when you were, because I really agree with you that we just don't know enough about the Free State time. And I'm wondering if when those political, catastrophes happen, if they were allowed or permitted when it was so clear how the Free State could not be the entrepot that they were hoping it could, with all the promises of the beginning. So I mean, I'm just kind of wondering, is it the chicken or the egg? I don't know the answer. You started me thinking about we got to do more free trade, so I blame you.
Okay.
Gabor, did you have a question? You said you had some questions. Or should we let Dora maybe ask?
No, well, actually, Ernei.
I guess it's my turn.
Yeah, Ernei had to say something about with a comment or.
I want to say, not have to. I want to, because yes, thank you for this too, for a very thought-provoking commentary and a very interesting and excellent question. I mean, regarding this 1970s way of doing history, I do agree. I mean, it was after microhistorians came on the stage. This was everything disregarded as totally as a complete rubbish. But I do think that such a way of doing research could tell us something about these political events as well. So hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss, because I can see that you have several great ideas how to tackle such issues, don't you? We could discuss about it later maybe. But regarding your specific question about the peasants, the first axiom of the microhistory is that subjected layers of population don't leave traces in the historical accounts. So yes, but I do believe that, I mean, they do have agency, and they do show this agency if you're able to find appropriate sources, and if you're able to read such sources between the lines or against the grain or whatever. And in this particular case, I came across several ego documents that clearly show that this was not only a matter of propaganda. They really weigh between, because they realize, okay, the whole thing would collapse eventually. So what would this mean for our existence as peasants or as farmers? And someone would eventually have to pay for this war, and taxpayers. We are taxpayers, so this is one aspect, and the other one is obviously this is a region that lies along the border. So there were family relationships, there were trade connections, and so on and so forth. So they were very, I mean, at least a number of these peasants was quite familiar with what happened across the border. So I do not think this is just a matter of propaganda. But what is also important is not to think about the peasantry as a social category that is homogeneous in a way. You know, there are those who are interested, and there are those who simply don't follow things and just follow what, I mean, no, try to follow their specific individual strategies of survival. So yes, there is agency, and we need to reconstruct it, in my opinion, peasant agency. Thanks.
Okay, Gabor, did you want to ask something, or
I think there is a really fascinating question in the chat line, so it's much better to discuss that one than to have my question to Aniko, which she can easily answer at another occasion.
Okay, so it looks like Dora has a question. Does someone want to vocalize this? Yeah. Erne, you've been chatting, so maybe you want to continue?
Sorry?
Well, you've been sort of answering her question.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, I mean, actually, this dualist option was seriously proposed by several Slovene politicians during the conversations with the Pasic, for instance, how the future of the Yugoslav state should look like. And what they proposed is actually the transplantation of the dualist organization of Austria-Hungary to Yugoslav, to the Yugoslav, to the future, to the emerging Yugoslav state, which should be, in their view, divided among former Austrian territories as a one part, and enlarged Serbia as another one. So this was seen as a feasible solution, it seems to me.
Gabor, sure.
Well, yes, I think it's a really fascinating question and complex. So yeah. Please cut me short if I'm starting to speak too long. But I think there are several relevant aspects of this First World War statehood and ideas of practices of statehood that reflect not just a kind of problematic perception of dualism, and therefore maybe what you suggest, a kind of reluctance to think in federalist terms, but also there is a different one which somehow reflects that, if not necessarily dualism, which was based on the equality of two states, but also the asymmetry of their internal organization. So this asymmetry is present in these post-First World War nationalizing states that are supposed to be more uniform than, or pretend to be more uniform than they were. And this asymmetry is sometimes easy to trace back to some kind of Austro-Hungarian legacy. One thing why it's not so easy to conceive a kind of dualist solution in all of these cases, like Romania, that you are not studying, so it's not, that Romania got pieces of Cisleithania, one Crownland, Bukovina, large chunks of Hungary. So nothing that was really suited for thinking in these terms, and yet there were actually proposals around 1919 of organizing the state along the lines of not dualism, but the centralist federalism, what Anton von Schmerling proposed in the 1860s, or what was the idea of Aurel Corneliu Popovich's in his Vereinigte Staaten von Großösterreich. So it was Alexander White, the voivode, who had a plan. We don't have the text, but we have a letter in which he gives the outline, and he tells that on the 1st of May 1919 in Paris, he presented the plan to Ion Corneliu Brătianu, the Romanian prime minister of that time. So this is one which is really interesting. And if you think of, well, Czechoslovakia acquired Carpatho Ukraine as a supposedly autonomous territory. Later, they introduced some kind of province system, but until the province system, they administered Slovakia with a so-called plenipotentiary ministry that was uniting several branches of the ministerial administration in one ministry. So complicated this issue. It's quite interesting to see this kind of asymmetries. And when we are speaking of federalism, Jana Osterkamp's recent research is quite interesting and fascinating in this regard, as she actually argues that a horizontal cooperation between the provinces that was not supposed to be supposed to exist within Cisleithania became stronger and stronger after the turn of the 20th century, and especially during the First World War. And it was a kind of template the Austrian Republic used to establish federalism.
Do we have any additional questions or comments? Any follow-ups to that? I mean, we're approaching 7 o'clock, so it's been a while. Okay, Gruya, do you want to chip in here? Oh, we've got Ivo. We've got Ivo has a question. Unless yeah, Ivo.
Thank you. I've unmuted myself. I'm Ivo Milusnic. I'm a curator in the Rijeka Regional Museum. And I have a question for Elizabeth Haight, because I'm interested in the role of Archduke Wilhelm Franz of Austria from the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, who was actually quite involved in this Galicia-Bukovina territorial dispute between Poland and Ukraine in the First World War, post-First World War period. Because I'm personally interested, because he was born in the island of Lochin, where his father and his family of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine were living quite often. And it was an interesting thing to see that the Habsburgs were actually thinking about how to act when the republics would form after the war, or if the democratic republics were ever formed, or parliamentary democratic republics, they would still, they thought that these republics would still need a ruler from a noble family, like the Habsburgs. So I don't know if it is known. I have read only parts of a book from Timothy Snyder, The Red Prince, The Secret Lives of Habsburg Archduke. So this would be the interest, because he was actually born in our region, and he was quite prominent in these events following First World War, in this dispute between Poland and Ukraine. And it was interesting that brother of this Wilhelm Franz of Austria, who was called Albrecht, was intended by the Habsburg House to take over the role of the ruler of Poland, while his brother Wilhelm was intended to inherit the throne of eventually formed Ukraine. So I know that he was quite involved in these events, fighting in war, and later, after Ukrainians lost the fight with Polish, he was living in exile in Vienna, and he had quite an interesting life. So I'm hoping you could give me more information, where to find more information about this person, if you have any information about him. So that's it. That's my question. I actually need help with this guy.
Yeah. I can't give you any further information. Timothy Snyder is for sure the most detailed book on this subject. Well, Wilhelm is a really interesting question as a pro-Ukrainian figure in this territory, but. So he played a role in the late Habsburg and the late war period, but in autumn 1918 there wasn't really a option for a monarchic option, but there was really a democratic republic, and he didn't play a role anymore in this time. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other final comments? I think we're approaching the end, but I was also like to just well, thank everybody for participating. Gabor for having such a great project, and Ivan for moderating this, and for all the students that were forced to attend, and all the public that joined and were listening along, and for the great questions. And I guess my sort of like final idea would be also just the process of putting together such a team, this ERC grant, because Rijeka now has an ERC grant that we just received. Jeremy Walton has received the grant and will be hosting him in Rijeka. So, which is also very similar to your post-imperial project. So I'm hoping there'll be some continuity and some of the same topics, and we get a chance to continue the collaboration. And at this part of the conference, I would be inviting you all for some great seafood and perhaps some drinks, some tarsa beer or local rakias of choice. But alas, we're all going to have to just close our laptops and do some self-isolating drinks. But here's the link. I'm sure all of you already know this is the project that that Gabor has presented. How many more years is left, or what stage are you in the project? Just Gabor, I can't.
So it's nominally it's more than 2 years left, but due to the COVID, there is a possibility to stretch it a bit further. So it will definitely not end in February, at the end of February 2023, but we will continue up to the end of that year, I think. We will see.
Well, I'm looking forward to more collaboration. Again, this was supposed to be a live event, unfortunately not, but this also enables a lot more people to join. So, I guess that's the silver lining is this Zoom platform. But again, hopefully there'll be some more collaboration to come, and because a lot of interesting ideas, and of course, you know, the work that all of you are doing and coming to Rijeka, and we'll get a chance to share these ideas. So thanks a lot for me. I think my students also enjoyed the presentations. Good luck with your project, and we'll be following you, and see you all live soon, I hope, or on another Zoom conference. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for having us.
And